With me today is Jette Stubbs. Jette is a career and business coach and the podcast host of Happy Career Formula. Welcome, Jette, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Christy. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you because when you reached out to me, you said a couple of sentences that really stuck out. And one was that your career journey started when you had 90 days to find a job or leave the country, and you had no family with you at the time and less than $100 in the bank. But you made it work. So I'm interested to know how.
So when I graduated from university, I was living in Canada as an international student, and I had outstanding tuition debt of about $5,000. And based on a bunch of immigration rules and complicated things, I basically, if I wanted to stay in Canada, I had 90 days to find a job or leave the country. And I sent out over 100 applications and I got 0 responses. And I was really confused because I thought, I did what I was supposed to do. I went to school, I got good grades, I got a lot of experience, I volunteered, I worked, I did all these internships and opportunities while I was in school. So why is nobody ready to hire me now? Like, why won't anybody give me a chance? And I realized that you can have all of the skills in the world, but if you don't know how to sell yourself, you won't go anywhere quickly. So I converted that 0% response rate to over 100 job applications to a 70% response rate. So for every 7 interviews, for every 10 applications, I was getting 7 interviews. And that was a huge shift in mindset about how to sell and market myself and put myself out there and forward. So that was it, but it was really scary because I had no family in the country. When my parents dropped me off for university, I was 17 years old. They stayed for 3 days and then they left and never came back.
Wow.
And they were like, you can figure this out. We've never lived in Canada. All we can do is give you some financial resources. But I graduated in the middle of like the Great Recession, 2008 to 2011, right? So I didn't know how to market myself, and I realized I had to make that shift. And eventually I realized when work started being complicated, like my first supervisor was racist and would make a buzzer noise every time I said something that sounded like I was from a foreign country. And coming from a foreign country, that's a lot of words. So eventually I wanted to make a shift and become more entrepreneurial. And as I started to do that, I realized that the same principles applied for finding what you love to do. So narrowing down that career choice, narrowing down that business idea, and then selling yourself effectively to start a business. And I started talking to people about that. Yeah.
So let's just wind it back a bit. So first of all, where's home? So where did you come from before you went to Canada?
So I'm originally from the Bahamas. Yeah, I grew up there until I was 17.
And did you decide to study in Canada just because of the opportunity with universities there, and or what sort of took you to Canada?
So in 2007, when I was going off to school, we had very few choices for universities in the Bahamas. So now we have the University of the Bahamas, but before that it was a college at the time, and there were some universities that were really like offshoots of American universities that had small bases here, but it was just very limited choices for post-secondary education. The Bahamas is pretty small. At the time, said the population size was about 300,000. So I think now it's about 450,000, somewhere around there. So we didn't have this huge post-secondary booming opportunity. So a lot of people would go off for school, and if you could financially afford it. And I was fortunate that my parents had become entrepreneurs later in life, and they had me later in life so that they were able to help me up until the recession when their business lost money.
Wow. Yeah. Because university is very expensive in Canada, and especially so for international students. So did that make the decision to decide what to study even harder? And then what did you actually decide upon when you had decided this is the path for you?
So that was really complicated because when I was trying to figure out what to study, I didn't even understand how universities worked. Like I said, my parents didn't have the opportunity to go off to university, which meant I was a first generation student. which meant I didn't know what a major was, what a minor was, what like how degrees were structured. It was all new information for me. And I really had to first learn how universities worked. And that in part happened from like older cousins who sat me down and said, this is everything I wish I knew when I went off to school. This is how a major works. This is how a minor works. And then I started just exploring different fields that I liked. My parents were very adamant that no matter what, you should study business because you need to understand how making money works. And then outside of that, you could study anything else that you want. So my first year, I took a sociology course as one of my electives because I think I took a psychology course as well, but the focus on the individual didn't interest me as much as the focus on society at large and how everybody interacts. So I started with sociology, and then in my second year of university, I decided I want to continue on with both sociology and business. But at the time, like 10 years ago, everybody was like, why are you studying two things that are total opposites? They couldn't see the connection. I think now it's like, yes, you're studying how you can improve the system and how capitalism works. And it's more understood now where that connection happens. But constantly I would be asked, why are you studying two things that are absolute opposites? So I sat down with one of my friends and I did labor market research. And we started by going through and looking up what type of jobs we want to do after we'd graduate. What we found was sociology on its own was pretty hard to turn into a job. We weren't finding a lot of jobs that were just looking for sociology degrees. I found jobs that were looking for business degrees, but through a lot of internships, I realized I wasn't really interested in working in a corporate environment. So what I ended up doing was, I think either her or I, we stumbled upon this field called community development. And it was listed in a ton of job postings. It was a new field at the time. Everybody was asking for it. And it had a lot of like higher salary opportunities. I think we found something where we could go to the Northwest Territories, which is this super cold part of Canada where it has very low population and some of the land is literally ice. So we found these opportunities to go up there where they'd pay you like $5,000, $10,000, like I think it was bi-monthly or every couple of months as a bonus, just for staying that long on top of your salary. And then they'd give you a living stipend because it is more expensive to live there. It's more expensive to access fruits and food because everything needs to basically be imported to a smaller population. So from that, we were like, yeah, we should definitely study community development. Plus, I was just interested in it. It was all about grassroots movements, social movements, how you could educate adults to just create transformational change and improve systems. And a lot of that is stuff that I still use today. So I think part of it was really realizing that I needed to figure out what I wanted to do after I graduated and find jobs that interested me. And then I reverse engineered it to build out the experience that I needed. But it wasn't until the end of my degree that I realized I had to learn how to sell these skills that I spent all this time developing. Yeah.
And so you obviously spent, those years developing those skills, and you got to the point where you graduated, but you did find it difficult to get a job. So did that hit you hard in the sense that, you're at university, you think that just by doing these courses that you're going to be able to come out and have this sort of dream career. So what went through your mind when you graduated, and how panicked did you get knowing that you had that looming deadline of 90 days?
So my birthday is in the end of April. I turned 21 and I finished university basically the same day. And it was weird because my dad didn't call and say happy birthday or anything like that. And what happened was he was basically prepping himself to tell me, like, I can't support you anymore. The most I could ever do is a ticket home. So that's how I ended up with $100 in my bank account. I did have this part-time job that was 500 Canadian dollars a month. That didn't cover even my rent. I told my landlord and they reduced my rent from 500 to 450. So I had $50 left.
Oh my goodness.
And I went to food banks and I walked to work because I couldn't afford a bus pass. But I was walking like an hour and a half round trip to work for 2 hours.
Wow.
for a part-time job. So I had a lot of time to walk and think.
Mm.
There was this huge pressure because at the time I really wanted to try and stay. I wanted to try and build a life that was very like independent for myself, where I was carving my own way. But I had no idea why I wasn't hearing back. I had never really done an interview, even though I'd had all these opportunities in the past. It was all through networking. And now I realized I didn't really have this network of people who were professionals who could get me into opportunities in Canada. I had always been too shy at the networking events. And I had to realize that if I wanted to make this shift to become more proactive and take more control of how I'm putting myself out there, I had to totally revamp it. So I went to every newcomer workshop, every networking session I could find, and I basically put myself out there in a way that I had never done before to sell myself. But it took a lot of like self work in the process.
Mm.
And it took a lot of me analyzing, well, really, why am I not getting opportunities? But there was also this internal fear. I didn't want to be stuck in a dead end job. I didn't want to be stuck in a cold country without any family and not even be able to afford to visit home. I didn't want to be stuck paying off tuition debt forever because I didn't have enough disposable income to pay down debts after paying my bills. And I realized what it would feel like to be trapped in that situation. So I had this strong internal motivation. If I did all this work, I needed it to turn into something. And I just absorbed all of the content that I could. And I worked like 10-hour days, 6, 7 days a week. And I treated finding a job like it was a job. But first, I had to take a step back from just applying to all the jobs at random to really realize, what do I want? What type of job do I want? And how can I best pitch myself to those people that I truly want to work with?
Now, tell me about the job that you got. And
Mhm.
was it something that you really, obviously, you narrowed it and you focused on what you should be going after? Was it a job that you wanted, or did you find yourself that you just sort of took it because, you needed it, and then you would think you sort of grow upon that, I suppose, as time went on?
It was absolutely a job that I wanted. So I narrowed down a field that I wanted to work in. I came up with this process. This is how I started my business, actually. So I said, I don't want just any job. I want a happy career. And I said, what does a happy career truly look like so I don't feel stuck? The first thing that I said was, what do I want out of life? So I want to have at least 3 weeks vacation to go back home. Um, and then ideally have some additional vacation outside of that so I could visit other countries as well. So I wasn't just trapped in the cycle of, oh, this guilt of going back home versus going to go on a trip to Mexico or a trip to Europe, wherever I wanted to go. I wanted something that would allow me to continue my education, because in my 4th year of university, one of my professors sat me down and he said, do you know how university works? I think you'd be really good in grad school. And I said, I can't afford that. And he's like, they pay you. And he's like, how do you not know about this? And I said, my parents never went to university. And he said, I'm going to sit down and explain to you like how the university system works. And over the years, if you need more advice, come back to me. And I went back to him and asked him for advice. So I wanted someplace that if I chose a paid route for education, that they would help to fund that. I also wanted work that I would enjoy. And I realized that if I'm there 21 and I don't know how to sell myself, that there are probably a lot of my peers that are in the same situation. So I chose this field called experiential education, which is bridging the gap between academic theory and practical real world experience. And it's going into university environments and educating youth about how they can take what they're learning in the classroom and apply it to real world situations. And the way I was going to pitch myself was saying that I was a real world example of me doing this to get the job. And so I applied online for 10 jobs, and I was 10 jobs that I really wanted. And I was one out of 132 applicants for my top choice for the top company that I wanted to work at. I had no connections to work there. I just sent this really stellar pitch. And my cover letter was totally tailored to that company. And after I graduated, my my supervisor, 6 months after I was hired for the job, quoted the opening line of my cover letter off the top of her head because she said it just really stood out to her. And I was shocked. I was like, I didn't expect you to remember it that well. And she's like, no, you understood what I really needed. And it's like you had dissected the job description. I said, I did. I really did. So yeah, it was absolutely the job that I wanted. It was at a higher pay rate than I wanted, and I was able to increase my salary once I got there by, I think it was about 30 or 40% within the first year.
Wow.
And I started to have a team of people that I was like leading, not directly supervising, but basically my boss's boss came to me and said, your job description is changing so rapidly that we can't keep up. We're going to wait till your job levels out and then we will restructure your job description. Until then, we'll give you bonuses. And they just gave me a couple thousand in bonuses like every other month.
Nice.
So yeah. So I was
That's
like
what you want.
21, 22, and I was coordinating a team of 4 people. I was leading my office because my supervisor went on a sick leave. And it was just this amazing opportunity for growth, but it came with so many challenges as well. Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. And I think one thing that just stood out to me then is that you said that you treated looking for a job as a job, which I don't think a lot of people do. Even if you're trying to change careers, it's sort of just you go through the job ads of an evening or something and yeah, I'll just apply for that. There's not really a conscious decision of what job or career that you want and then specifically going after that. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about how you help other people do that because you've got your own business and I'd like you to talk us through that and then how you help people find that path.
So when I got hired at the first company I worked with, because I was such a young employee, when they talked about people working there, they talked about people 25 to 30. And here I was 21, younger than a lot of the students that were coming through that were about to graduate. And I was being given leadership opportunities. So that was totally unheard of. I know people were gossiping about me because some of the gossip would come back. And what happened was some people started reaching out to me and asking me for help. And they said, you created this growth in your career. How can I do this too? Like, what are you doing differently? Can you review my resume? Can you help me prep for an interview? And I started helping people absolutely for free in my lunch hours, after work sometimes. And eventually I got to this point where people started offering to give me gift cards because I was helping them get salary increases, or I was helping them land their dream jobs, or figuring out what their dream job was and then landing it. And then I started having friends invite me out for dinner at their homes. But what was really happening was they were gathering a group of their friends who were struggling with their careers and basically bribing me with a few glasses of wine and food to get some free career coaching. So that's how that piece started. So from there, I started career coaching. Eventually, I got to this point where I had more gift cards than I could spend. Like, I wanted to eat out, basically, and I knew it wasn't a good use of money. And I'm like, okay, I've got all this money sitting on an Amazon gift card, but I can't pay for the food that I want to eat tonight. Well, I could, but I don't want to spend this money. So why don't I just accept money? Like, what is the issue that I'm having with accepting money from people who are making money off of my work? So I had to really question my own money issues, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through as from my experiences. And then I started talking to people who were really struggling with experiences with discrimination, whether that was based on race or disability or family status. I worked with some new mothers that were in the sports and entertainment field, which is very male dominated. And they were saying, oh, well, they were told they should be at home with their kids in the evening. And so they shouldn't be at like a sporting event because their kids would miss them. But the fathers were treated totally differently in the workplace. And I just realized there were all of these intersections of discrimination or negative experiences that people have. And then outside discrimination, there's the micromanaging boss or the toxic work environment, or maybe you're going through a really bad personal environment. One of the obstacles that I faced was in my first 18 months at that first job that I really loved. My mom was stabbed in a robbery 17 times. And
Oh my
I had
goodness.
to, yeah, it was a tough time, especially with dealing with discrimination at work and then having that happen and then having all of those leadership opportunities once my supervisor went on a sick leave. It was a lot for me to juggle and manage, and I started to get physically sick. And so I realized that sometimes you need to create a better situation for yourself that is outside of a 9 to 5. And because my parents were entrepreneurial, I started telling people who I was giving career coaching to who were really struggling. I said, have you ever considered entrepreneurship? Especially for the type of for some of them, the type of work that they were doing. If it was marketing, they could turn that into consulting. And they could easily transition if they were taught systems. And I was always so interested in learning about business systems. I had been following other entrepreneurs. I've been following like Pat Flynn and like John Lee Dumas and all these people who were in the entrepreneurship space and learning about it and reading about it. And then I had all this knowledge that my parents had taught me and downloaded into me basically since I could speak. As soon as I could speak, my parents' business was in car rentals and villa rentals. And they taught me how to explain insurance to tourists and how to make pitches. And my dad would be like, hey, I want my kid to learn how to do a pitch to you. Do you mind if I put her on the phone instead of me?
Oh, I love it.
And when I was 13, he brought me into an interview and he's like, this isn't the real interview, but would you mind doing a mock interview? I've given you the job now, but can you give her, let her do a mock interview with you? So there are all of these lessons that I had learned that I could then share with people. And I took all this information for granted about how to really start and grow. So I took that and I just started sharing it with people. And I helped some people like leave their 9 to 5s and grow their businesses in under 12 months because they replaced their income. And it wasn't until I just had a bunch of people sit me down and say, you need to do this full time. Like I would pay you to do this. Initially I was working with aerospace engineering, and I had a bunch of PhD candidates in aerospace engineering sit me down and say, you should do this full time. You're absolutely good at career coaching. And then with the entrepreneurship, I had people sit me down and say the exact same thing. They're like, why don't you do this? And I said, oh, well, I don't know enough. And they're like, but you helped me. So that was the journey that I went through. And then I had to own like the title of coach. I didn't feel comfortable with it. I was like, oh, I don't want people to feel like I'm forcing information on them. But that's not what I do. And I had to, that was a process for me to unlearn certain ideas I had about who I am and what I can offer. Also, like how old you need to be to do some of these things. Like, can you be too young or too old? Do you need to like put the work in or wait your turn? All of those mindset shifts around if you are helping people, then, and it's adding value, then you can turn this into a job, freelance service, or business that helps you achieve your goals once you are adding value and helping people.
So how did you, I suppose, rationalize all that? And how did you overcome your fear of not knowing enough? Do you think that to do what you do as a coach, you obviously no one can know everything, that's just a given, but do you think you have to be able to say, I'm here to help with XYZ, and someone might ask me about something else and that's okay? Like how did you rationalize that in your head to say, okay, I don't know everything, but I know enough to do what I need to do?
Well, the first thing that I did was I continued to learn more, and I realized if I learned a new thing each week, I would be a few steps ahead of the clients that I was working with. I'd be a few steps ahead of somebody who was just starting out from scratch. And if I learned one thing a week in 52 weeks, so 1 year, I would be 52 mini steps ahead of the person who was just starting out from scratch and knew nothing. And I already knew some stuff. So I knew stuff that my parents had taught me. I had already went to business school, but even outside of business school, I had been listening to podcasts and learning about how to start a business and reading business books for entertainment. It was something that I just loved learning about. So part of that journey for me was actually just writing down some of the accomplishments that I had had. So I asked clients for testimonials. I went out to people who I'd coached before and I asked them for testimonials. I had some people who had like moved countries a few times. So one person moved from like New Zealand to Toronto to Ireland, and the coaching principles, the career coaching principles that I had taught helped them land a job with a social media giant when they just moved to a new country. And
Wow.
it when I asked her for testimonial, she wrote like a page and a half. And I just, after, I think it was half an hour after I sent the initial email, she had already started writing a page and a half. And I said, oh, don't worry, it doesn't need to be too long. Like, don't feel stressed out about it. Just a paragraph would do. And she's like, I already wrote a page and a half. So I'm gonna, I'm just going to send you everything and you can shorten it down as you'd like. And then I started getting more and more testimonials. But even outside of the testimonials, it was great validation. But outside of the testimonials, for me, what was really important to do was write down like how I want to help and my why for why I was helping people. So for me, what I want to do long term with my life is two things. I want to help people um, build a career that aligns with who they are, whether that's a job, freelance, service, or business, and then have better relationships with themselves. So I think if you have a good relationship with yourself and others, so you have a good network of people around you, and you have your finances in order so that you can access the opportunities that you want to, you can have a good life. And I realized that the times where I was stressed out the most was when I didn't have a solid support system around me. So when I was in a new country, and I had no friends in Toronto because I didn't go to school in Toronto. That was when things were hardest. And initially, when I first started, even though I got a good job that paid well, I had to pay down my tuition debt in like 4 months. So I had to pay like $5,000 out of my, I don't think it was five, I think it was like 2 or 3,000. I was able to scramble like 2,000 from friends and family and a scholarship. But I had to pay like $3,000 out of my salary out of in like the first couple of months in my job. Plus I had to pay first and last month's rent and all of that, like setting yourself up, plus getting like a work wardrobe because I was in a student wardrobe. All of these things like dwindle down to even a good salary when you don't have that support system in place. So I really wanted to help people understand the importance of having that support system, how to cultivate it, because I realized I did have some amazing friends. I had a friend drive me. So she picked me up from the bus stop so that I could go to my interview. She let me stay at her parents' home. She drove me an hour to the interview, waited for 2 hours while I did the interview,
Wow.
and then took me home for her home for a dinner and all of that, and then drove me back to the bus stop the next day. So I took up like basically like a whole day of her time. She didn't ask me for a dime. I offered to pay gas without like the $50 that I don't know if she knew that was all the money I had. She's like, don't pay me a thing. Like, I'm sure we're going to be friends for life. So I'm sure you'll pay me back somehow. And just having these networks and these support systems, like even me moving cities, I had a friend make 2 trips in her car so that I didn't have to pay for movers. And just creating these support systems was one thing. And then the other piece was understanding how to have the financial resources so you don't have to be such a strain on the people around you. But having that system and support system in place helps you as you're building your way up. The other piece is, sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, so,
Yeah.
with that support system, at the time, did you feel it was a support system, or it wasn't until you sort of took a step back and then evaluated it that you went, wow, I really do have strong, a really strong network around me?
I knew I had people who really cared and wanted to help. So, yes, I knew they were really good friends. I had like 3 or 4 really good friends who would help. Um, but I also knew I was moving to a city where they wouldn't be there. So I knew I had them, but I also knew they would be scattered and that they would eventually have to focus on their own situations. And if I ran out of that 90-day time frame, I would have to like leave the country. So yes, I felt supported, but at the same time, I felt like everything was falling out from underneath me because they couldn't do
Mhm.
anything to really help the underlying problem that I was in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Definitely. It's a very stressful predicament to be in.
Yes. Yeah. Um, the other point that I was going to make was with the relationships. I realized that relationships are fundamental to business growth and to career growth in general, because when you're building out your dream job, you're essentially building out a relationship with an employer where you understand that employer's needs, you listen to them, and then you add value to solve their problems. And adding value, when I first started, was such an abstract term. Like, how do I figure out how to add value? How do I figure out how to solve problems for clients or companies? Um, until I really started to like dissect job descriptions, and I started to listen super attentively to potential clients. And I said, what are you struggling with? What are some things that you wish were here? And I started listening to when people said, oh, I wish that I could get this done really easily, or like it was a shift in mindset that helped me realize that making money was really about listening to people's problems, building out a plan to help them solve those problems, and then asking to be compensated in return. Because if you don't ask to be compensated, as I learned, people won't necessarily hand you the money. So it's about that trade in value. And I started to understand and conceptualize it very differently. But it's the same principle that applies to your close relationships. When you're building out a relationship with your partner, your romantic partner, you want to think about, okay, what type of life does this person want to build? Can I help to contribute to that life? How can I add value and provide emotional support to that person? And then what do I want in return from them? And how can I communicate that? And how can we structure that in a way that works for both of us? So it was a fundamental shift in how I viewed all of my relationships that helped a lot with emotional growth, but then contributed to financial growth.
So I did want to ask you, how did you end up deciding that, yes, you can take money for the services that you're providing, like that you are actually adding value and you need to be compensated for that with
First,
money?
first it was the insistence of people that I was working with. So some people offered to pay me. Eventually, some people offered to give me, like, if they were like, if you don't want to accept money, like, I'm going to give you this gift card. And then I realized I had too many gift cards. Then when I started asking for money, I started asking for really low amounts. I started by saying, "Oh, I'll do your resume for like $100." And what ended up happening was people just said, "I want to give you more money because I just got this amazing job. I got the job that I've always wanted, that has the flexibility that I wanted, that has a higher salary. I just made $10,000 extra a year. I gave you $100. That's not fair." And so if people were coming to me and saying it wasn't fair, then what happened next, which was really crucial, was my dad was diagnosed with dementia, and I wanted to move countries to help him. So I quit my job, packed up everything. My brother basically called me and said, and he used his full name, cannot handle this situation anymore. And if I do, I don't know where I'll be mentally by the end of it. Um,
Wow.
so within about 60 to 90 days after he said that, I had given up my like apartment and was flying back home to help out, and I had to find a new way to make money. I
Mhm.
had already wanted to leave my previous workplace. It was great. They had already put me in. I was there for about 5 or 6 years, and they had already put me into like a future leaders program where I was networking with all the senior leaders within the organization. It was application based, very competitive program that a lot of people didn't get into, um, and I was like hand selected for it. But as I got into that program, I realized I just didn't want to be there. That solidified the knowledge that I didn't want to be there. And then when my brother called me, I just knew I had to go. Otherwise, I'd regret it. And for
Mm.
me, the decision to quit was much more about like, if I'm going to be 70, like hopefully I'll get there. When I'm 70, what would that version of me want to do or wish I had done at this point in time in my life?
Mm.
And once I realized that and I really internalized it, I figured there was no other option. Like I wanted to go and spend my last days with my dad, and I wanted to support my brother and be a good sister and not leave him hanging. So I also didn't want to deal with any guilt or rip that out that would create in our relationship, because he had already quit his job and left Canada to go back home and help my dad. So I wanted to be there and support him, and also be there to spend time with my dad. And my dad passed away about a year afterwards, so it was definitely the right decision.
I'm very sorry about your dad, and I think that sort of situation is really hard to have to deal with as a young person. You start your career, and you're on this fantastic trajectory, and then all of a sudden life happens, and you have to make those decisions. But do you think, in a way, that happening helped you find your value even more so? That you were able to really go, right, this is what I want, and this is what I deserve, and this is what I'm going to charge?
Yes, absolutely. It helped me find my value. What I found was, as I was continuing to coach from the Bahamas, what happened was people started just giving me referrals. Like, I wasn't confident to push myself out there or network in an entrepreneurial sense. I had just mastered it for a job, and now I was being like up leveled. Now you need to do it to be an entrepreneur. I'm like, I don't know how to build a website. What do I say about myself? Do I talk about the fact that my supervisor was like, my first supervisor was racist? Because that means I'm talking negatively about a previous employer. What if this doesn't work? And then I have to go and find a job, and it's all over the place that I had like, I'm not smashing that employer. They were actually really supportive about that whole situation in the end. But how do I go then and look for employment afterwards? And I was just really scared. Like, how do I talk about how complex my story was? So I think it was huge for me, because what happened was I started being more open with clients who were struggling in their careers and their struggles, because I realized that my story was helping them. So initially I thought, oh, if I'm opening up, I'm just pushing my hurt and what I'm dealing with on other people. And eventually I realized that people benefit from knowing that they're not alone on their journey. They benefit from speaking to somebody a few steps ahead of them, and who can give them guidance. So I made a shift in how I think about speaking with my clients. What happened next was I started getting all of these referrals and word of mouth. So each client I was working with was sending me about 2 or 3 referrals. They'd be like, oh, my friend would be so great for you to work with. And at this point, I was still charging way too low for what I should be charging for my services, and the salary increases and opportunities that people were getting. Because most people would get like a minimum of like $10,000 to $15,000 salary increase. And a new grad, instead of getting stuck in some like $30,000, $40,000 job opportunity, was landing their first job between $60,000 to $80,000, even $90,000. So if I could do all of that for people, I needed to charge more. And as bills started piling up and my savings started to deplete, I was very fortunate that with my first job, with the salary increases that I was getting, I was able to accumulate a lot of savings when I quit. It wasn't like anything over, like too far over like 100,000, but I had some pension and I had like multiple different resources. Luckily, when I went into that first job, I had the HR advisor sit me down, and she's like, you are younger than my child, so I'm going to tell you how what I would tell my child if she were starting in this job, and I hope you don't find that as an insult. I mean it as a compliment, because you are younger than my child, and I don't think my child could get here right now, to be honest with you. So I'm really excited. Yeah. So she told me that I should invest in pension and do all of these things with my salary so that I could end up having more income. So by the time that I left, I knew how to leverage whatever savings I had and the matching opportunities that I was offered, because it was a job with a lot of benefits and opportunities. And so I had some money, but it was depleted very quickly, because I was using a lower currency to pay for a higher currency and medical expenses in a country that doesn't offer universal healthcare. So that it was like $5,000 to $7,000 a month going easily. So even $100,000 wouldn't last that long. So what I then realized was I needed money. I needed money really quickly. And to be honest, it didn't quite happen at first. I found the next struggle that I had was juggling my like mental well-being with being a caregiver. At the time, I was about 26, 27. Um, and my brother and I were like independently trying to take over what was left of my dad's assets and manage them and basically recover things and dealing. He leveraged some things right before he um, got dementia, and he couldn't really tell us how he had set up everything, and it wasn't in paper. So I learned a lot about like generational wealth, how it is lost within the generation that is often made because you don't teach your kids or you don't provide enough information to create that generational legacy that I think he envisioned himself creating. And it's there in the knowledge that he provided. It is there in a lot of what my parents were able to give us, but I learned a lot about that transfer of knowledge, and I realized that I wanted to make a very intentional approach about how I handled money. And I started reading on it, like reading about Your Money and Your Life, which is a book, and a bunch of other opportunities that I had to learn about money mindset and shifting how I thought about money so I could access it better. And also realizing some of the internal beliefs that I had that and where they were coming from, like insecurities or trauma, things like that, that made me think about money differently and made me think about what I was capable of doing in a very limited way and restructuring that for myself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think financial security is such a huge topic, and that one, especially that women don't really invest much time into. And you find that a lot of women, they're unable to fulfill the lives that they want to fulfill because they do not have that security. So, I think it's probably one of the most important things, even though as women we find it so difficult to put a value on our time and ourselves, and being able to think about that. We don't want to think about that. We don't want to come off as callous and money driven and that sort of that way. But you have to think about it. It's so important. It's vital to your success into your older age. So I think it's amazing that you found that. And how are you going now, a few years on, with regards to how you value yourself? Have you got it nailed down now? You're all good with that?
Towards the end of 2020, I hired my own like business coach who was a few steps ahead of me. So she'd already had her first like $1 million year. And I worked with her to really fine tune how I was going to incorporate my story into what I do. So it took me a long time to get to the point where I took very difficult life situations and basically honed them down into this conversation that I could have with you that feels like transparent and authentic, and I don't feel like I'm like using your story or pitching myself in a weird way. I'm telling the truth of what happened to me and telling how I now help people. And I think it was a realization that I needed a sounding board that knew what I knew, who wasn't me. Uh, so that I could have somebody tell me, hey, if you were giving yourself this advice, you would do this differently, or you would word this differently. And that was huge for me to really nail down first that I could be a career coach and a business coach. Because I had a lot of people asking me, like, how are you both a career coach and a business coach? Like, those are two different things. And I was always like, no, it's not the same thing. And then I would go into this long spiel. I was like, how do I explain this? That the same principles apply for finding what you love to do and selling yourself with confidence, whether it's a job, freelance service, or business. To create that one sentence took me so much work because I knew it conceptually, but I didn't know how to explain it to people in words that they understood. And once I nailed that and I was able to talk about that effectively, I realized I could start collecting testimonials from a bunch of people that I've worked with in the past. And the testimonials that I have now, like after a few years of doing it and seeing the growth that people have had in a few years. So initially, yeah, if somebody gets a job where they just graduated and they're making 80K, that's great. But if their next job is 110K and then their next job is 150K because they are using the same principles that I taught them the very first time, and they don't have to come back to me. They're just growing their career on their own, and they're constantly using my principles, and then they're teaching their friends how to get better opportunities or negotiate salaries or negotiating that $10,000 contract with a company so you have income stability for your business. Like, those are things that help people for the rest of their lives. And then people started talking to me about how I didn't just help them with their relationship with their money or their careers. They said, you helped me have a better relationship with my father. You helped me have a better relationship with my partner. You helped me look at how what I was doing and the way I was approaching things in my life, that relationship dynamic was playing out in every single aspect of my life, and how I can shift that. And I wasn't sure initially how to incorporate that, if people would want all of that sort of jumbled into one. And hearing back the positive feedback, but also the continuous growth that happens after people worked with me, was the piece where I felt like, okay, yes, I feel like I'm adding value, and I'm confident with doing this and spreading the word.
So what's next for Jette?
So I recently launched my own podcast, Happy Career Formula with Jette Stubbs, where I talk about exactly what I mentioned before. I talk about how to have the two relationships that I think are super important. So understanding how to have a good relationship with yourself and others, and then also understanding how to have a good relationship with how you make money and how you approach money. So that podcast is all about that. I'm really excited. It's just launched. I got my first 200 downloads in about the first 30 days, and then I got about 300 downloads in the 60 days, I think it was. So people are listening to it, but more importantly, people are reaching out to me and giving me feedback. So I want 2021 to be my year of consistently showing up and helping people and listening to the questions that people are asking and giving honest feedback. And then if people choose that they want to work with me or book a consultation call, I'm very open to it, but I never have them as high pressure calls. It's more about figuring out if we fit and if I could genuinely help the person. But I'm really excited to consistently show up in like podcasts like this, and in my own podcast as well.
Yeah, well, Jette, I've absolutely adored speaking with you today, and I've spoken to a lot of coaches just over, my years. And what's really struck with me today is your comment on you're a couple of steps ahead of the people that you help. And I've never heard it phrased that way. And I think it's such a great way to sum up the value that you can get from a coach, whether that be business, life, any sort of coaching that you actually get, even sporting. It's somebody that's just those few steps ahead to be able to help you get to the next step. And so I think, that's such a great takeaway for me today, to potentially put faith into somebody else to say, bring me up to that level. I love it, because I'm all for mentors, and I spend a lot of time with mentors, but I've never actually taken the step to go, I suppose, the formal route of coaching. So I enjoy speaking to everybody on this podcast. I find that a little bit about coaching for me, and learning about the things that they do and how they can help us all. But one last question that I do have for you, Jette, and that is, what would you do differently if only you knew?
If only I knew, I would have started building relationships and networking much sooner. And I would have approached networking from a place of being a connector of people. So I think a lot of people get a ton of butterflies when you say, go out into, I guess, pre or post pandemic, like a networking event, and speak to people, go up to a stranger and say something. And it's all these feelings. Oh, this person's going to judge me. What do I say? What do I talk about? How do I keep the conversation going? And the biggest shift that I've made is shifting from having those nervous butterflies in my stomach to shifting to seeing myself as a problem solver and a connector of people. So I'll go up to somebody and say, hey, what problems are you experiencing? Or what's your goal? Why are you at this networking event? Tell me a bit about what you do. And if I constantly do that, I basically have this like roster of people, and I know all of their different needs. And then I just start matching people with each other, and I become the connector of people. And because of that, I haven't really done anything in particular other than listen to other people's needs and then say, hey, I just met Jill. Jill wants to do the same thing as Tom. Tom and Jill, you two should connect. And then they remember me as the person who connected them because that was a super helpful connection to them. So I become this positive memory in their mind. So if I want to reach out to them, first, they'll remember what I said I wanted and start to recommend me to people in their networks, which is great. And then two, they will have a positive memory of me. So if I come to them in the future, even if it's like a few years later, it's even better if I stay in touch and don't let those few years pass. But even if I come back a few years later, they'll be like, yeah, I remembered you. That was such a positive connection. Like I have people who I connected with in high school and they're like, you were so nice in high school. And I'm like, I don't really remember speaking to you that often. But they're willing to help me now because they were like, yeah, you did this thing for me way back when, and you introduced me to this person. And in high school, I had a bit of that. But what happens when you experience like trauma or discrimination, things like that, it shakes your confidence and you question the way people will look at you and the way people respond to you, or if you'll get that negative comment again. And so that had really shifted, and shifting back into that, it was really important for me, but I wished I had done it throughout university and done it much earlier in my professional career, because I think my business would have grown so much quicker and at a really key time. Like if I had started in the like 2010-ish, I would have been light years ahead where I am now. Yeah. So that's the one thing.
And look, networks are so important. And, you know, I definitely think that anybody speaking to you would come away from that conversation with a positive feeling. So I think that's such a fantastic characteristic to have anyway. So Jette, I've really enjoyed talking with you today. And if you'd like to know more about Jette, you can head over to ifonlyouknewpodcast.com.au, where I'll have links to all of Jette's socials, her website, and also her podcast. Thanks, Jette.
Thank you so much, Christy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.